Hello, my name is Allie. I'm an independent graphic designer coming to you from just outside Toronto, and this is my channel where I talk about what I'm knitting, how it's going, and what it's costing me, particularly today, what it's costing me this year, because we're recapping everything that I knit this year, including a project that if you've been here before, you will recognize and see making its debut as a finished object. But before we get into it, today I'm wearing my squiggle sweater. So this is one that predates this year, so if you want to see more about this one, you should go look at my Everything I Ever Knit, which is one of the very first videos that I made on this channel at the start of last year, just to kind of get everyone caught up to what I've knit up to this point. So in that video, I talk more about this. But so this is a sweater that I charted, basically trying to duplicate an existing sweater from And Other Stories that I couldn't find anymore. But I based it off of Amy Herzog's basic pullover set in sleeve construction, and then created a chart to lay on top of it from there. So I've had this sweater for, I think, about a year and a half now. And in that time, I've worn it 39 times. So this one has gotten some really solid rotation. I really like this sweater. It's nice and comfy and just easy to put on. In terms of the cost, this one was on the more expensive side. I spent $222.50 Canadian in materials, which with 39 wears brings us to a current cost per wear of $5.71. So converted out to US dollars, that's about $154 US for the sweater, or about $4 per wear currently. But that number's been steadily working itself down, and I think it will probably continue doing that. In terms of my mug and tea for the day, this is a brand new mug that I got for Christmas from my sister, who knows me very well. So this is my new Disney Christmas mug. I really like it because the design is like embossed in it. See? I like texture and things always. And out of this, I am drinking today the Golden Moon tea from Keats & Co. I actually just picked this up from my mailbox this morning because it's been trapped in Canada Post Purgatory for like 2 months because of the strike. So it finally arrived. I finally got it today, and it's really, really good. It's a sort of like citrusy cinnamony, but I often don't really love citrusy cinnamony teas because I find they tend to lean very kind of far toward the spicy side and away from sweet. But this one is much more sort of like sweet, like citrus forward rather than like cinnamon spice forward. I really, really like it. It's part of their seasonal collection, and so it does feel very appropriately like wintry. Like today's the correct day to be drinking it. And Keats & Co, if you haven't been here before, I have a coupon code for 25% off your order if you want to try them out. If you go to good.store/AllisonRowan or use the coupon code AllisonRowan, so you can try it out if you want with a great discount. And also the great thing about Keats & Co is that 100% of their profits are donated to fighting medical injustice worldwide, like equitable distribution of tuberculosis treatment, because tuberculosis, despite being entirely curable, is still the #1 most deadly infectious disease worldwide, which is just silly because we can cure it. And one last thing before we get into everything I knit this year, we have a giveaway winner to announce. So in my last video, there was a giveaway to win a box from Hooks and Needles, and I rounded up all those comments, drew a random number, and the winner of the Hooks and Needles box is Pine LMJ or Pinel MJ, I'm not sure which, but congratulations. If that's you, please send me an email at elliemakes@gmail.com, and Hooks and Needles will send that box out to you. All right, now let's get into everything I knit in 2024. So I'm gonna do this in the order that projects were finished, which is similar but not quite identical to the order that they were started in. But I think that the order feels like it makes more sense doing it that way, just because of how long one guilty party of a project took, which you will see in a moment. But the first project that I completed this year was actually a gift knit, so I don't have it physically here with me to show you, but I will pop in a picture. And these are the Snuggly socks that I made for my dad for his birthday in March. So the Snuggly socks are a pattern by Isabella Gersbeck, and they come in 3 different sizes, and I was knitting the size 3. This pattern cost $6 US, which converted out to about $8.50 Canadian. And I knit this out of Filcolana Peruvian in the color 833 or Limpopo. And this one used like 2 skeins plus a little bit of a third. So all in between the pattern and the yarn, this one cost about $40 Canadian or about $30 US, and left me with some yarn that I can use later on to knit my dad more socks because he always wants more socks. Now these socks were, I think, my second time knitting out of Filcolana Peruvian. I had knit my dad a pair of socks at the end of last year, I think, as his Christmas present. So I was familiar with the yarn already, but I did still really enjoy working with it. It has a nice sort of like it's rustic enough that you feel like, ooh, this is going to be like a really good pair of like warm, sturdy wool socks, but not so rustic that it's like hard on the hands or like itchy to wear. It just feels to me like the perfect wool to knit my dad's socks out of, like just A+. So this is a cuff down sock design, which I think is still the only kind of, have I ever knit a toe up sock? I don't think that I have. I think they've all been cuffed down. And these are intended to be knit on size 3.5mm needles, but because I knit tight, I knit them on 4mm, and they turned out great. I think I ended up knitting these like quite a bit taller than the pattern suggests for you to in the leg, knowing that in the history of socks that I've knit for my dad, there is very much a tendency for them to felt a little bit on the foot through wear, because he and I both really like 100% wool socks. But with that, you can get some felting. So I've learned over time to knit his leg extra long so that if some of the foot gets stolen by the felting, starts pulling the leg down, we don't end up with ankle socks. And I think that the next time I knit him socks, I will also knit the foot extra long to compensate for that too. But I don't think that these ones have yet really suffered that fate in the way that his previous socks have, because I gave these to him at the end of March, which is sort of at the end or even after the end, depending on the year of snowmobile season here in Canada. So these socks are really just sort of beginning their career in Dad's life as a Canadian snowmobiler. So hopefully these will serve him well. And to give us a bit of a timeline, I cast these on February 10th and I finished them March 21st. So given that February cast on date, of course, these were not the very first thing that I started knitting this year, as discussed. We'll come back to what that was later, but these were the first ones that I finished because I cast these on mostly to have a portable project when I was going on a trip to Italy at the start of last year. I wanted something small and very portable that I could bring with me on the plane, that I could fit into my tiny luggage because I was going carry-on only. So I wanted something that was really practical for that, and these socks were perfect. One thing that I also really liked about these socks was that they have kind of like a distinct look in the stitch pattern on the leg, but it was very simple to actually do. I think it was a 2-row repeat maybe, and it's really just like a knits and pearls situation. So I found it super easy to memorize, really easy to do while sitting around with family on my trip, chit-chatting, being able to pull it out on the train between places and just pick a way out without having to open up a pattern or look at a chart. It was just a really nice sort of passive project to work on, while still resulting in something that has a distinctive look that's a little bit different than the socks that I'd made Dad before. So I really appreciated that about the pattern. The next thing that I finished in 2024 is another small project, which is funny because I feel like on the whole, I don't tend to knit a lot of small or accessory things. But again, part of this is because of the ginormous project that started early but didn't finish until a bit later. So this next project I cast on as sort of I need a break. I need to finish something while I'm in the midst of this behemoth of a project that has no end in sight. And that is my dog walking gloves. So this was a project that I conceived of following that trip to Italy where I was working on Dad's socks. While I was in Venice, I picked up a ball of Cecia Ulisse wool in the colorway black, but you can see it has this sort of fun flecking in it with this lighter beige color. It's 100% wool, it's made in Italy, so it felt like a very appropriate sort of souvenir yarn to buy. And when I got it home, when I was trying to decide what to do with it, I was thinking about how I feel like I've never had the perfect hand warming situation for when I'm walking my dog Copper, because you need to be able to access poop bags. I also want to be able to access treats. So it's this awkward situation where like I want to be as warm as possible, but I also really need my thumb and my index finger kind of at the bare minimum for dexterity. So I went into the project thinking, what could I come up with? Can I sort of start with an existing pattern as a baseline, but then modify it to come up with something uniquely suited to what I'm trying to do? And part of this thought process was I learned about trigger gloves, trigger mittens, which, I don't live in a place where hunting is super popular, so this is not a thing that I'd ever heard of before. But when I saw them, I was like, interesting. I feel like you could potentially cross that with the idea of fingerless gloves and come up with something that might be well suited here. And I'm gonna have to pull some footage from my previous video because I've misplaced part of these gloves. So let me show you. So I started with a pattern for fingerless gloves. And so this is the fingerless glove portion, right? Standard fingerless gloves. So this pattern is the Bridge Arm Warmer by Kukiko Inoue. And this is a free pattern. It has this nice ribbed texture. And I modified the pattern a little bit by, I think I shortened the arm section, but lengthened the finger section so that it comes like up over my knuckles just to get me a little bit of extra warmth. But then my concept and what was going to make this my perfect dog walking gloves was that I actually knit a separate little piece, sort of like fingerless gloves with the flap that would come over, but that would only cover 3 of my fingers so that my thumb and index finger would still be free. And that little part was not attached like a flap because I didn't want it to sort of get caught on my pocket when I pull my hands in and out of my pockets, because I do that a lot when I'm out walking Copper. But I also didn't want it to be like a permanent attached part, so I was thinking, well, I would probably get more wear out of these if they can just be regular fingerless gloves part of the time. So I knit these little separate pockets that would go on, and my intention was that those would attach with snaps. And I found that this was one of those things that was a better idea in theory than in practice. First of all, I only got through sewing on, I think, a quarter of the snaps. I really struggle with like sewing things on to knitting. Even when I try to sort of pin things in place, I find that just somewhere in the process of stitching into this, sort of squishy, wobbly fabric, things never end up in the same place that I thought they were. Like things end up crooked or a little higher or lower than I thought they were going to be. I just find it very fiddly and I'm never satisfied with the results. So I put on, I think, one glove snaps and was testing it out. And I just found that kind of even with the snaps, having that extra piece on just felt a little bit fiddly. And then I found when I was wearing it without those add-on pieces, now there were just random snaps on the gloves, which, you know, is fine. There's still one in here. I think I removed a couple of them, but I haven't removed that one yet. And it's on the inside so you can't see it, but when it's cold, and this touches your hand, it's metal, so it's very cold. And also, I have been finding that when I wear them just as fingerless gloves, sometimes I like to roll them down if it's not super, super cold, because I get a little bit of better dexterity with it rolled down. So if it's not like a maximum warmth situation, sometimes I'll do that. But when I do that, now suddenly the snap is visible. So I think that with these gloves, where it was sort of better in theory than in practice was that I was just trying to do too much with them. I think that probably the actual ideal dog walking version of these would have been to knit like a permanent mitten part for these 3 fingers and just leave out these 2, like sort of doing a fingerless glove version of the trigger mitten. And then if I wanted a pair of fingerless gloves for general life, I should have just made a dedicated fingerless pair for that, rather than trying to do this sort of like detachable trigger finger mitten situation. So like right now, I've been wearing these to walk copper all the time. It hasn't been super cold here. It's sort of been hovering around the freezing point or just a little bit lower here. So having these has been plenty for most days, and I spend most of the walk with my hands in my pockets anyway. So these have been good for that. When it hits like -20 outside, then I might start to feel like maybe I should reevaluate a different version of this. Maybe I just go back to wearing regular gloves where I'm dissatisfied with my dexterity, but I need to be warm, so what can you do? I'm not sure. But so I have been using these regularly since it got cold out, but I have not been using the little add-on pieces to the point where like, I don't even know where those are right now. Like I tried to find them to include in this video, and I could think of a few places where I thought they might be, and they were in none of those places. So I have lost track of them. I'm sure they will turn up at some point, but as far as how this knit is faring in my life since finishing it, like this part, quite well. The little add-on parts, not so well. So like I said, I knit these out of this Susia Ulysse yarn, which I think cost about $25 Canadian, which converts out to about 17 US dollars. And for these ones, I honestly don't have an accurate count of how many times I've worn them. So when it comes to my clothing, I track what I wear using an app called Stylebook, and that's where I get my cost per wear calculations, but I am much less diligent about tracking accessories. So I would guess that I have worn these at least 15 times this season. I think that it's more than that, but just to be on the safe side, let's calculate this out with 15. So since the pattern was free, the yarn cost 25 Canadian, 17 US. That brings our current cost per wear to $1.67 Canadian or $1.15 US, which is not bad. I mean, as an accessory, you know, I think it's easier to get a lot of use out of these. So I think that these are going to work their way down to a really low cost per wear really quickly. Like I think that by the end of this winter season, they will be comfortably under $1, which I love to see things get under $1. So that's exciting. So I cast these on at the beginning of April and I finished them at the end of May. I remember starting them when it was still a little bit cold out and I was thinking like, oh, maybe I can get these done really quickly and still get some use out of them this year. That did not end up happening because I forget exactly what happened at this point. There was a bit of a complication where I had to go back and kind of do some surgery on, I think this one has a little bit of a more raggedy bottom than this one. So this one you can see a nice tubular cast on. This one was kind of an attempt at replicating that after the fact. I think I maybe originally had knit the arm too long and realized I had to steal some, and then by the time I was knitting the second one, I knew that that was the case, so I just made this one the right length to begin with. But so that is in part why these took me 2 months to do, because I kind of set them aside for a while when I was like, I don't know exactly how to fix this at this moment. I don't feel like fiddling with it. I'm just gonna go back to my behemoth of a project, which while massive and taking forever, is also very, very simple and sort of meditative to work on. So let me do that for a bit. Which now brings us to the third project I finished this year, which is in fact that behemoth of a project, the No Frills cardigan. So this is a pattern from Petite Knit. It accommodates up to a 59-inch bust, which like just so close. I knit the size extra small, and this pattern goes for 45 Danish kroner or about $9 Canadian. All right, let me get up so you can see the whole thing. All right, here she is in all of her glory. And also I hope that the audio sounds a lot better because for Christmas, I actually got a couple of upgrades for my channel, including a proper mic, which is the same mic that I'm using when I'm sitting closer to the camera to record today. But when I wander over here, I can clip it on, and now my audio doesn't sound terrible when I'm talking to you from across the room because I'm trying to show a full-length garment. Isn't that exciting? So anyway, here is my No Frills cardigan, which I absolutely love. Like, this was a complete beast of a project for sure. This took me forever, but I also wear this all the time. I suspected when I cast it on, I hoped when I cast it on that this was going to be something where, okay, yes, it's gonna take me an eternity to knit, but I will be so glad that I did. And that is exactly what has happened. This has become a default for me. Like if I am cold, I'm like, where is my no frills cardigan? Let me go get it. Let me put it on. Basically functions like a house coat for me in that way. But I also think it's really fun to make outfits with because it's fun. It's just a statement piece, right? Like it's big, it's bright, it's colorful. It's a lot of fun. And when I do put it on just because I'm cold, I'm like, oh, look how cute I look just at home lounging around. What a nice bonus. So this is easily one of my favorite knits of the year. And is it my favorite knit of the year? I think it might be my favorite knit of the year. So I think that this one is probably the winner. I mean, it even has pockets. I didn't knit anything else that has pockets, so. So to get this yellow color that I am absolutely obsessed with, this was a bit of a hunt. So I got the Knitting for Olive Merino in the colorway Mustard. And originally I just wanted to get their mohair that went with it because most of the Merinos have a matching mohair. But for this one, the Merino was called Mustard and the mohair was called, I think, Dark Mustard or something like that. And for good reason were they named differently, because the mohair was just kind of darker and duller and just more toward the brownie side than I was looking for. I really wanted this to be a nice bright yellow, but also not a lemony yellow. Like I wanted it to lean slightly orange and not brown and not green. So I had a surprisingly hard time finding a mohair that was kind of the exact shade of yellow that I wanted. And then one day I got an email from We Are Knitters that was advertising like a big sale on their mohair. That's when I realized that they have a color called Mustard that was exactly what I was looking for. It's a little bit more bright and saturated than the Knitting for Olive Merino, but just slightly enough that I knew it would just kind of pull the Knitting for Olive color exactly to where I wanted the whole garment to be. And I'm so happy with how it came out in the end. And I got such a good deal on the We Are Knitters yarn because it was on like mega sale. Now, because the We Are Knitters yarn was so on sale, I was a little bit scared that maybe they were discontinuing the colors. So I decided to really err on the side of caution when it came to the number of balls that I was ordering, because I have a history of running out of yarn and needing to order more, and I was worried that that wasn't going to be possible. So in the end, it turned out that I'd ordered so much more than I needed. I think that I used maybe half, just over half of what I'd ordered. So I have a ton of this left over. And I do have some thoughts of what I might ultimately do with that I did talk about a bit in my winter knitting plans. But until it actually does become another project for the purposes of cost, I'm going to be rolling all of that into this project. So in all, between the pattern and the yarn cost, this one cost me $240 Canadian, or about $175 US, which, I mean, that's less than my squiggle sweater. So considering how ginormous this thing is, that's not terrible. Honestly, when I first came up with the plan to knit this cardigan, I was thinking this was going to cost me like $300 to $400 potentially in yarn, just based off of the cost of pullover sweaters I had knit previously and how much they were and the fact that they weren't duster length. But I think I was really saved on this one by both the sale at We Are Knitters and also the fact that this is at a DK weight, and a lot of the sweaters that I knit previously were knit at a slightly thicker gauge than that. Just thicker gauge, more total yarn volume, more expensive. So I think that between those things, this one actually turned out more reasonable than I expected it to. And cost per wear wise, it's starting to work out really well. So to give us some timeline context, I started knitting this one January 5th. So there we go. This is my first cast on of the year. And because it is ginormous, I didn't finish it until June 25th. This basically took me 6 months to finish because it's a lot of sweater. I was knitting it on 4.5mm needles. The pattern calls for 4mm, but again, I knit tight, always gotta size up. Oh, hello, Pepper. So that's just a lot of knitting at that gauge, but I have worn this sweater so far 35 times, which again, I think is probably on the low side because there are definitely days where I just throw this on as a house coat that it probably doesn't end up getting logged. But that puts us at a current cost per wear of $6.85 Canadian, or $4.75 US. And again, considering that I've only had this for 6 months and I've already worn it 35 times, that's more than once a week, I think this one has fared very well in terms of finding its role in my wardrobe and getting some use. So I feel great about that. This knit worked out fantastic. The only thing that I don't love about it is that you can kind of see here, the button band has a tendency to fold in on itself like this, and I find myself always wanting to kind of straighten it so that it's more visible, but it always kind of does just end up like tucking itself in there sort of under my arm. And I wonder if this were a double knit button band, if it wouldn't do that, or if it just still would, and now it would just be a double knit button band folded under. I don't know. So that's not my favorite part about it. Like if I were trying to like take a nice picture wearing it, I would want to like do this first, you know? But I really love this cardigan. I think that it's great. And it was also just, it was a nice process. I mean, it's not like a thrilling process, right? I mean, you're knitting like feet and feet and feet and feet of stockinette, but I did really like that it's a raglan style construction, so it's really easy to get started with. And then another thing that I really appreciate is that the button band is knit simultaneously. Like you just have a little bit of alternating knits and purls at the end of each row. So you don't get to this point where you've knit this whole length of cardigan and now suddenly you have to pick up like 1 bajillion stitches to knit a neckband all the way up and back down again. I think that would have been quite miserable. And it was really nice to just get to the length I wanted to get to and be done. I mean, done. There was a bit of a saga on this one in terms of finding the right length. I actually did a full project vlog about this, pulling together all my different project updates from the like, think like 17 different episodes that this cardigan appeared in over the course of how long it took me to finish it. So that video goes over the whole entire process if you're curious, but you know, a few little hiccups aside that were entirely like my own problem, not pattern problems. I really enjoyed working on this one. You know, I love just knitting and stockinette. And if you love just knitting and stockinette, this is a great project. All right, the next project that I finished is my Tekla top by Milena Jahala. And you can basically see almost none of this right now, so one sec. All right, here we go. So this is sort of a loungewear tank top pattern design that has this cute little ruffly bottom. We have the triangle shaping in the front, and we also have cute little I-cord ties at the shoulders. And it comes down super far at the back. You can see the back is quite small. You can see that mine has a tendency to want to ride up at the back, like if it's actually sitting like level front to back, it's I think something like this. But it tends to end up shifting forward just a little bit, just because gravity, you know, I mean, the front of the shirt is just heavier than the back of the shirt because it's bigger. So I don't know if there's really any getting around that. Maybe tying it strategically could get around that. I'm not really sure, but it is cute, right? I mean, is it like super structurally sound in a way where I would just like throw it on and like leave my house for the day? No, like if I were gonna wear this out, it would be a real fashion tape situation. But just in terms of like loungewear around the house, it's perfect, it's cute, I like it. So this pattern is designed to accommodate up to a 60.5 inch bust. And this pattern costs 7 Swiss francs or about $12 Canadian. And I knit this in the size 2 with an asterisk. So I did a bit of modifying because after I had done the triangles, because the way you start this is with 2 separate triangles for the front and then you cast on stitches for the back to knit in the round. I was finding that when I initially cast on the number of stitches that the pattern called for, that it was starting to feel really big. Like I believe this is supposed to be a neutral ease fit, and that's not what was going to be happening if I'd cast on the number of stitches that the back called for. I think in retrospect, I totally could have knit the size 1, and that's probably what I should have done, but because I was gonna say that far in. These triangles took like an hour. Like it did not take very long to get to that point. So in retrospect, maybe I should have just started over, but it turned out fine. I like it, it's fine. So like the dog walking gloves, this was a project that was sort of retro engineered based off of finding a yarn, which is not how I usually work. I am usually a much more like plan forward, like what project do I want to make? Okay, now what is the appropriate yarn to make that out of? What colors do I want to make that out of? That's my usual process. But both the dog walking gloves, because I had found that yarn in Venice that I really loved. And then this, I had just discovered hedgehog fibers. And I was like, oh, this budgie colorway is really, really pretty. I've never found a variegated yarn that I really felt drawn to before. This is exciting. This is different. I'm gonna buy it and I'm gonna find something to make out of it. And then I struggled for like the first several months of this year. I mentioned it in numerous of my videos that I was trying to figure out what to make out of it. I was looking at different options. I was debating this and that. I was making mock-up upon mock-up. I made a whole video about how I mock up perspective knits to decide what I want to do. I was just struggling so hard to come up with what to do with it. What could I make with only one skein? What would really show the yarn off to the best of its ability, not kind of hide it, camouflage it in an elaborate stitch pattern. So the Tekla top is what I ultimately landed on to fit that bill. Now I think as a result of that, it's not the most worn piece in my wardrobe. You know, I think that starting with what do I want to knit, what do I think I would really love to wear, is a much more sort of functional, practical way for me to pick my knits and end up with things that actually serve well in my wardrobe. But on the other hand, I really like this yarn and I wanted to make something out of it, and I did, so that's all right. So like I said, I knit this out of hedgehog fibers in the colorway Budgie on their Oh So Fine base, which is a fingering weight merino. I think this was my first time knitting at a fingering weight, and I was surprised by how quickly it came together. I mean, obviously there's not like a lot of fabric here, but even still, like fingering weight's small, and I expected this to be more time consuming than it actually was. I cast this on July 4th and I was finished it by July 22nd. I mean, it had the benefit of, I think I had at least a couple of different cottage weekends fall within that time span, so I got quite a bit of relaxed cottage knitting time on this, which was really nice. So in terms of costs, between the pattern and the yarn, this cost me $60 Canadian or about $42 US, but unfortunately I've only worn this 4 times, so our cost per wear is not going down quickly. So we're currently at $15 Canadian or $10 US per wear, which is pricey. And I think that this one is probably destined to continue being on the pricey end because again, I just don't find it like a super effortless thing to wear. But it is cute. I mostly enjoyed making it. It was mostly just knitting stockinette. It was also my first experience with I-cord, which I found a little bit fiddly to get started with. I was concerned that it would feel kind of similar to doing a sewn bind off, which I don't really enjoy doing. Like it feels like a fiddly finishy thing, but I found that doing the I-cord, it just feels more like knitting than like a fiddly finishy thing. And I mean, I think a key distinction of that is just that an I-cord is you're actually still working it with knitting needles, right? Like it's not like, okay, time to get the tapestry needle and like do this completely separate thing. So that was nice. What I don't love is that an I-cord involves picking up stitches. I don't really like anything where I'm picking up stitches. I always feel some uncertainty around my pickup rate and around like, am I picking this up in the best way? It all feels kind of uncertain and trial and error in a way that I don't love, but I do really like how it turned out. And now I know that I'm capable of doing an I-cord. All right, next up we have the Cloudbow top. And I just finished saying that the Tekla top and the dog walking gloves were unusual for me and that they started with a yarn in mind rather than a pattern. But I realized as I start talking and thinking about this one, that I guess 2024 was the year that I really kind of broke that pattern, because this is another one that started with a yarn. And this one was because I went to Knit City Toronto. It was my first time going to a yarn event like that. And there were a ton of indie dyers, which was not historically a thing that I was looking at a lot. Buying that yarn from Hedgehog Fibers for the Tekla top was kind of my first like real foray into that, and kind of realizing that there are variegated yarns that I actually do like. Learning that there is kind of a particular style of them that I really like had me go like, maybe I should go to Knit City Toronto and see what I find. Maybe I will find something there that appeals to me. And what I ended up finding was the Wandering Flock Silk Mohair in the color Cosmic Tie-Dye. And now I had gone into that event thinking, okay, if you're gonna buy some random yarn you don't have a project in mind for, it should probably be a mohair, in large part because I find that most indie dyers tend to use superwash bases for the wool, which just isn't my favorite thing. I prefer non-superwash wool, so I was like, okay, mohair is probably a safer category to look at. And I was already kind of curious about the idea of knitting an all mohair garment. So with that in mind, when I found this yarn from the Wandering Flock at Knit City Toronto, I picked up 2 skeins of it, and then I went home and sort of debated between a few different mohair only patterns that I had in mind before I went to the show as sort of potential uses of what I might find there. And that use that I landed on was the Cloudbow by Reed Keys. This is a pattern from Pom Pom magazine, so I did have to buy the whole magazine to get the pattern, and that cost was 11 Great British pounds or $21 Canadian, which like is a little bit ouch. But this pattern accommodates up to between a 62 to a 66 inch bust, just depending on how much of the recommended positive ease that you want. And it knits up on 6.5 millimeter needles, so this is a really fun, quick knit. Now, between that relatively high cost of the pattern and those 2 skeins of Wandering Flock yarn, this project cost me $130 Canadian or about $90 US. So the construction on this one is interesting. You start by knitting 2 squares that are just like the center front panel and the center back, and then from there you're picking up stitches to cast on sleeves in the round and also the peplum part in the round. Now, the pattern does not include any kind of short rows, and I was finding that when I tried this on, I was getting a really noticeable slant from the front to the back that I was not loving. So this was a project that prompted me to do some research and figure out how to add in my own short rows, because otherwise I really liked how it was turning out, but I was like, I cannot leave this without short rows. I don't love how this is turning out. I also didn't love that for a pattern that costs that much money, I had to do that much of my own sort of re-engineering of things, but I also understand that magazine patterns are a little bit different. I mean, hopefully I will end up knitting other things from that magazine issue in the future anyway, but yeah, just magazine patterns don't tend to be as detailed. They tend to be shorter. There's space issues, all of these things. So I understand it's a little bit to be expected, and I am really happy with how this one turned out in the end. All right, here we go. So you can see better at a distance for sure the colorway, the Cosmic Tie-Dye from the Wandering Flock. You can see that the color definitely knit up a little bit differently when I was working at flat versus in the round. It's a bit tough because it's sheer, so you can see my top underneath, but the top portion that was knit flat, it definitely has the colors looking more like sort of an amorphous gradient, just like floating indistinctly into each other, whereas the sleeves definitely have more of like a holographic stripe effect going on. But it actually, I thought it was gonna bug me when it started knitting up that way, but as part of the finished garment, I think that it's totally fine. I like how it looks. I love the poof of the peplum, even though it was approximately 1 bajillion stitches on the needles. And you can also see when I turn to the side, the short rows that I ended up doing. So I ended up doing enough that it actually becomes distinctly longer than the front is, but had I done nothing, it would have been like here, like it was really noticeably shorter than the front in a way that I really did not enjoy. So we added some short rows, and now I'm really happy with how it looks. So I think it's really cute. I feel like it's really distinct and unique, and I'm a big fan of this one. So I knit this one in the size 3, but it doesn't measure like a size 3. So I picked that size to compensate for my gauge coming out a bit small. And I think that this was one where I think I couldn't just go up a needle size because it was already on a big needle, like 6.5 millimeters. I think my interchangeable set jumps from 6.5 to 8, and 8 was just too much. So I ended up just knitting a size up. So this project I cast on May 25th, and I finished it August 5th, which sounds funny to me just because I feel like in my head this knit up so quickly. And I think that it actually did, like in terms of actual days or weeks that I was actively working on it. I think it was a shorter amount of that time, but I put it aside for a bit in favor of my next project at the point where I needed to kind of stop and figure out short rows. I think I was like about to go to my family's cottage again, and I needed something I could just work on for that weekend and not need to sit there and do a bunch of math and figure out a bunch of stuff. Like I just needed like a passive knit. So I just cast on my next project and got it to the point where it was sort of like mindless. And then I kind of got into that one. So this one I think fell by the wayside for a few weeks. Now in terms of cost per wear, this is probably the most like specific, I guess, thing I've worn this year, in that it's a distinct look, right? It's not something that I would just throw on the same way I just throw on my no frills cardigan. It both looks distinct and is also like climate distinct, right? Like I feel like it kind of takes specific temperature conditions to want to wear something that is mohair, which adds a considerable amount of warmth, but is also this open and is also not long sleeve, right? Like this garment thrives at room temperature. And sort of anything that tips a little bit this way or a little bit that way, and this is not ideal. So it's sort of specific conditions where I would want to wear this one, sort of an indoor activities only, but not activities where I'm going to start to warm up too much, right? It's specific. So given that, I feel pretty good about the fact that I've worn it 6 times since I finished it at the beginning of August. So with that makes our current cost per wear $21.66 Canadian, or about $15 US. All right, and for my next knit of 2024, I actually didn't even have to go get changed because underneath the Cloudbow top, I was wearing my Fausta top, which is another one you can barely see right now. So one sec. All right, this is my Fausta top, which I love. I love this project. Like, it required a lot of math. I talked a bunch in my videos while I was working on this about the math that I was doing, because this pattern is actually intended to be a bralette, and I decided that I wanted to make it a full-length tank top that actually would have waist shaping to fit my hips nicely. And because this is knit from the bottom up, that meant that I needed to figure out those adjustments before I could do anything, because I had to know how many more stitches I was casting on to start out fitting my hips rather than my waist. So this was a bit of a daunting project. Like, I had the materials for this months before I actually started on it, but I knew I wanted to do it. I knew that it was gonna be worth it, and it was so worth it, because this pattern is designed to fit you so well, because it's not just based off of one bust measurement. It's actually based off of both a bust measurement and an under bust, so that you're actually creating a gusset between those two numbers, and it just results in the most perfect fitting tank top. I adore a square neck. I love how wide and square and clean this is. It's just so good. Let me untuck it so you can see the full. So this is the full length of mine. I wouldn't wear it untucked like this over jeans that come up this high, because then you get weird bumpy stuff, but just so you can see the length of it. And let me get a bit closer so you can try to show you the waist shaping that I did, so you can see the decreases from this edge coming in toward the waist. Then you can also see here the shaping of the gusset at the bust. So this pattern is just so nicely tailored, so well thought out. I had to do a lot of calculating to figure out how to do the long version, but I'm so glad that I did, because I feel like, I don't know, it works so nicely just like this. I would and have worn it out like this as an outfit, but I've also found it perfect for layering underneath my Cloudbow like you just saw. I've also worn it underneath my no frills cardigan that you just saw. So it's just a really nice, versatile piece. It works well on its own. It works well to layer with, just perfect. So this is based on the Fausta bralette pattern by Loki Bull Knit. This pattern costs €7 or about $11 Canadian, and it accommodates up to a 56-inch bust, which I wish went further, but if you do fall within that range, just the customization of the bust gusset is just like a game changer. Like, I cannot express how happy I am with the way that that makes everything fit. Just 10 out of 10, and for reference, I was knitting the size 1A. So I knit the side of La Bien-Aimée Felix in the color Winterfell held double. And that's when we're like, that is an expensive yarn for a flat color. Like, generally, if I were to buy an indie yarn, it's normally going to be a variegated or a tonal, you know, something where I feel like you can really like see the handmadeness of it in it, if that makes sense. But I was lucky enough to get one skein of this for free from my friend Amy, because she was doing a destash, and I just was so in love with the color of it. Like, Winterfell, it's this beautiful deep blue-green color. Hey Buggy, it's okay. It's this beautiful deep greeny blue that I find so hard to find. Like, it's actually the color that I was trying to accomplish when I made my classic rib last year out of Blue Tit from Knitting for Olive, where the merino was basically the color that I wanted it to be, but then the matching mohair just leaned more blue and kind of pulled the whole thing that way. So when I got the skein of Winterfell from Amy, I was like, oh, this is like the color of my dreams, and I want to make the Fausta with it and that means I'm gonna need one more. So I bought one skein of it, I got one skein of it for free. And that to me is what made the project feel like reasonably priced for what it was, because between the pattern, that skein of yarn, and the shipping on it, this project cost me about $75 Canadian, which is about 55 US, and it would have been like over $100 Canadian if I'd had to buy both of those skeins of yarn. And I just don't think I would have managed to convince myself to spend over $100 on something this small, you know, but the color is just so perfect that, like, under the circumstances, having gotten one for free, I love it so much. So I cast this on July 21st and I finished it August 26th. So like I said before, this is the one that was sort of overlapping, taking turns with the cloud bow. And I mean, in retrospect, that's really appropriate because now they often get worn together. So it kind of makes sense. So since finishing this at the end of August, which is kind of funny timing to be finishing a tank top because it's also kind of finishing tank top weather. But despite that, I've managed to wear it so far 6 times with our project cost of 75 Canadian. That puts our current cost per wear at $12.50 Canadian or $8.70 US. So right now that feels really high for a tank top, but I feel like especially as we get into warmer months, it's going to get more use. And it's also just going to continue to get some use as a layering piece too throughout the rest of the year, if not quite as much as it probably will in the summer. Though it is wool, the La Bien Aimée Felix is a wool base, and I don't mind wearing wool in the summer, that doesn't bug me, but I do wonder if I will just kind of instinctively reach for it a bit less than other things that I might have. We will see. I'll be curious to check in on a cost per wear later in the year, like in the fall, after it's been through its first whole summer season. All right, the next thing I knit is the Sailor Swift Top by Veronica Lindberg. So this is a pattern that costs $5.90 in euros, but I happened to get it when there was a sale on, so I got a half off, and I ended up paying $4.40 Canadian. This pattern accommodates up to a 59.5 inch bust, which we're so close. Could we just like a little bit more? All right, so here you can see the whole thing. You can see the racer back style, cute stripes going on. It's just a nice, like, lightweight, casual summer tank top. I'll also untuck it. So here it is at full length. Again, it's like kind of awkward layered over jeans that come up this high. So I'd wear it tucked in, but it is nice to have the extra length so that I have the option of wearing it with lower rise things if I want. But yeah, I really like this one. It's cute, it's casual. It feels very like easy to wear and unfussy. Now I knit this out of the Knitting for Olive pure silk in the colors Putty, which I used 2 balls of, and Brown Bear, which I used 1. This was my first time knitting with silk, and also my first just plant fiber in general. I'd never knit with a cotton or anything like that before either, so it was very different. Just getting used to the like lack of bounciness in the yarn was a real thing. Like wool just has this nice natural bounce that just feels very like, it just has this sort of gentleness while you're working with it, where silk is just kind of like, nah, I am what I am. Like I don't know. I feared that I would find it like really unpleasant. I've heard of a lot of people talking about knitting with silk and talking about like really enjoying the finished garments you get out of it, but really not enjoying the process. So I was really happy to find that I didn't really have that issue. I didn't find it unpleasant. It was just kind of different and took some getting used to. I was happy the next time I got to work with some wool. I feel like it's sort of just the feeling of like, you know, you didn't like think you were uncomfortable, you weren't having a bad time, but then you like go home and you're like, here we are. So it just sort of felt like being away from home for a while, if that makes sense. So between the cost of the pattern and the cost of the yarn, this project ran me $55 Canadian, which is about $40 US. And I was knitting this between August 18th and September 20th. So again, this is another summer thing that I kind of finished like after summer was gone. So it's definitely not been in its heyday. In the time since I finished it. I'm really curious to see how it fares next summer. Will I gravitate toward this instead of my store-bought summer pieces? Like I don't really have a frame of reference yet for how I just sort of intuitively want to pick my clothes in warm weather and how my knitting fits into that. But despite that, I have managed to wear it 4 times since I finished it, which puts us at a current cost per wear of $13.75 Canadian or $9.50 US, which is very high. But again, this garment has not even met its correct season yet. So really curious to see how it's shaped up by like fall 2025. I feel like then I'll have a much better picture. But like in theory, I really like this garment. In theory, I feel like it's gonna hopefully serve me really well. Now, in terms of construction, this one you start by knitting the back panel and then you're picking up and knitting kind of the 2 sides of the front until you join everything in the round, and then you finish it off by adding the I-cord. So this was my second time doing an I-cord after the Tekla top earlier in the summer. So it was kind of nice to go into it knowing what I was getting into and that I had a handle on it. I do feel like, again, I'm like, do I have a perfect handle on it? Because I feel like when I added the I-cord, my underarms did become tighter than they were before, and I'm not really sure if that was just an inevitability or if maybe I was picking up kind of too far inside the edge of the fabric. Like maybe I should have been picking up less at the edges, or maybe it's just the tightness with which I was doing my I-cord, which wouldn't shock me because I do everything tight when it comes to knitting. So I'm not really sure. That fit could be a little bit better than it currently is, but it's not uncomfortable. It's more just like, it did not need to be that in my armpit. And like for something that is going to be worn in sweaty weather, like We don't love things to be in our armpits that don't need to be, just because then it obviously requires more washing, but like it is what it is. All right, my next knit of 2024 is another gift knit that I don't have here to show you, but I will pop in some pictures. So this is Mom's scarf, and this one is sort of all over the place. There's no pattern. This was just an improvised scarf thing that I came up with after when I was yarn shopping in Venice. My mom was there with me and she kept gravitating back toward this skein of Alp Premier in the color 420. She kept being like, oh, this is so pretty. Oh, this would make such a nice scarf. Like, she just kept coming back to it. And I was like, so what I think I'm hearing is that Mom would like me to make her a scarf out of this. So I bought the yarn and it's very eclectic. Like there's a lot going on. Some parts of it are ribbon, some parts of it are like sparkly tinsel, and like the thicks and thins are all over the place. Like it's not a consistent weight at all. And I concluded that really the only way that I could conceive of to use this yarn was to create something with a deliberately very open gauge, so that regardless of the thicks and thins that the yarn was doing, it still looked overall kind of consistent, because it would just be extra space and gaps regardless of how thick the yarn was at that particular moment. But I couldn't really find any patterns that fit what I was thinking. So I was like, okay, I think I can handle just kind of making this up as I go. So I just pulled out my biggest needles. I did a bit of a test swatch just to see, okay, roughly what's my gauge going to be. And then I used that to cast on the number of stitches I would need to create an edge of the scarf that would be 6 feet wide. And then on each row, I just did a decrease on either end of the row so that the ends of the scarf would have like a little bit of a taper to them. So this is what it turned out looking like. Obviously there was no pattern cost because there wasn't a pattern. And I think this yarn was $30 Canadian or about $20 US. This one also knit up so unbelievably quickly. Like I cast this on September 19th and I was finished at September 22nd. I guess that is what 10mm needles will do for you. So despite the fact that I finished this in September, I actually just gave it to Mom the other day because it was part of her Christmas present and she loved it. I was a little bit concerned going in, like, is this going to be what she thought this was going to look like? Because I do feel like, you know, I have found as a knitter, there's a thing where you see a skein of yarn and you're like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. And then you see the fabric it knits up into and you're like, is that, that's just not really like what I imagined. And so I was a little bit concerned that there might be some of that going on here because, you know, the hank looks like this and then the scarf looks like this. And like, you can see how those are related, but it's also not like a direct translation. So I was very happy that she was happy with it. I was like, okay, good. We we didn't go completely astray here. Perfect. All right, the next thing I knit this year is my new Christmas stockings. So this is the Christmas stocking pattern from Claire Slade, which is a free pattern. And because it's just stockings, there's only one size. And in addition to it being a free pattern, I also knit this out of functionally free yarn because I got it using a Michaels gift card that I got from returning something from like a million years ago. So that feels free at this point. And I knit this out of Bernat Fluffy. I think the color was called Cream. And this was my first time knitting out of an acrylic because up to this point I've been knitting garments. And part of what I love about knitting is being able to choose like really nice natural fibers that function really well for the kind of garment that I'm making. But then I realized, like, for stockings, that's not really a consideration. Like I don't actually have to spend like $150 on fancy sheep wool for something that just sits on the wall. So I took that as an opportunity to go cheap, and I did. So this pattern calls for a 5.5mm needle, but I actually upsized to a 6mm because I was using, I think, slightly chunkier yarn than the pattern called for. Despite the fact that I don't feel like these ended up huge. And actually when I was using the stockings this Christmas, I was like, this is smaller than my previous stocking. So part of me wishes that I had actually held the yarn double and upsized my needles even further just to get like a really big, really functional Christmas stocking you can actually fit a bunch of stuff inside of. But they did their job. They were all right, and they looked super cute hanging on my wall leading up to Christmas, which was really the main reason why I wanted to make myself new stockings, because I really just had one like ragged Winnie the Pooh stocking that I've had since I was like 3. So having ones that were actually like nice decorations that would go on my wall was a really fun thing to make. As far as construction, these are basically just like making any socks. They started at the cuff, moved into a heel gusset all the way down to the toe, and then I actually had to learn how to make pom-poms to go on the ends here. So that was kind of an interesting experience. And it also required me to learn how to make a crochet chain, which is what is attaching the pom-poms. And I learned that I'm really terrible at crochet. So, you know, the more you know. So I cast these on September 26th and I finished them November 1st, which is a lot longer than I thought that it would take me to make these, honestly. I was thinking that it would be similar to at the end of last year, I made a pair of reading socks for myself. And I thought it would be similar to that. And I knit those up like almost entirely over just a few days I was with my family over Christmas. Like they came together so quickly. And in retrospect, like that was an even bigger yarn. It's the Wool by We Are Knitters. It's like a jumbo weight yarn. Like I don't even know what you call it. But in my head, it was gonna be more like those. So the fact that it took me over a month, I was like, oh, I really overshot with my fall knitting plans. And now I am behind on my next thing you will see that I knit in 2024. So this design has a fairly elaborate cable pattern. There are multiple different kinds of cables doing different things on different rows at different times. So this is one where I definitely had to be working from a chart the entire time. So partly for that reason, I decided to do them 2 at a time, but on separate needles. I thought that just because they're quite big and chunky all at once on one needle might just feel like too much bulk to be, and I say that and then I'm like, is that true at all? Because you knit an entire sweater on one needle and that's more bulk. I don't know. It made sense at the time, but it meant that I could sort of knit all of one section and just be worrying about following the chart and not have to then be worrying about like following the instructions for the heel gusset or whatever new thing was happening 2 separate times dealing with that. I would just have to figure it out once and do it on both of them. So I much prefer that to the idea of doing all of one and then doing all of the other. But yeah, just the elaborate nature of the cable pattern really took me longer than I was expecting it to. And by the time I was done, I was like, oh no, I still have one more thing to knit this year and it's now already November. And I don't know how long this is gonna take me, so Godspeed to me. All right, so my final project of the year that's scraped in by the absolute skin of its teeth is the Minu Cardigan by Louisa Rekhoff. And if you've been here before, you will know that I have been desperately working away at this, trying to finish it in time to give it to my sister for Christmas. And last time we checked in, it was not looking good. But I'm here to tell you that there's been a Christmas miracle, because it was in fact finished under the tree on Christmas morning. But I have a bit of a story to tell you and how we got there. Before we get into that, I'll give you the project stats. So like I said, this is the Minu Cardigan by Louisa Rekhoff. This pattern accommodates up to between a 58 to a 62 inch bust, just depending on how much of the intended positive ease that you want, and I was knitting the size 3. So the cost of this pattern is €650 or about $10 Canadian, and I decided to knit this out of Cascade 220 Superwash in the color Deep Sea Coral. And for this one, I decided to do Superwash, even though it's not usually my favorite thing to knit garments out of for myself, because it was really important to me that this was a thing that didn't feel like a precious thing that my sister couldn't wear or needed to be really worried about how she was going to wash it. I wanted something that could get thrown in the washer, and if it ended up in the dryer on high, it would be fine. So between the pattern and the material cost, it cost me $163 Canadian or 119 US. And I knit this on 4mm needles, which is actually the size recommended in the pattern, which is unusual for me. But I think between the combination of like the way Superwash tends to grow and my knitting tight, it kind of evened itself out in this case. So this pattern is a drop shoulder construction. You start with knitting the back panel and then you pick up to do the 2 front sides, and then eventually under the arms you join those 3 panels together, so you're just knitting back and forth all the way around the body, and you pick up and knit the sleeves in the round. So I feel like I have a lot to catch you up on in terms of how the rest of this garment shook out, like more than it feels like I should, since my last podcast episode was just a regular project update episode where I was talking about this, but I did so much knitting in the last 2 weeks of this that like I have basically the equivalent of like a month and a half's worth of updates to give you on this project. So here we go. Thought number 1. Does dog hair just stick to superwash wool more than other yarns? Because I don't remember ever working on something where I felt like I was so constantly like, ew, get out of here. Oh, dog hair. Ew. Like I just felt like I was constantly having to pick dog hair out of this project. And I can't figure out if it's just, is it just the color? Like, is that much dog hair always there and I just can't see it? Or is it something about this yarn that's just, like, maybe it is more prone to like static and collecting dog hair that way? I don't know. I just know that this was like a constant battle. And then particularly when I was working the Italian bind off, because since this whole long length of the yarn is being pulled through the loop that you're sewing into, any hair along that whole entire strand of yarn is going to sort of catch on that loop and build up into a little fuzzball as it gets pulled along. And if you don't remove it, gets sewn into your edge. So because I didn't want to have like a light beige colored fur trim all around the bottom, because it's Copper's like beigeish undercoat that is what he sheds the most, I had to pick out constantly while I was sewing this bind off to keep it out of there. I don't know, it was gross, it was a mess. Anyway, so I think in the last update I had finished the sleeves and I had started working, you know, the rest of the body below where it's joined all into one piece, but I hadn't gotten a ton of that yet. And since that update, I ended up adding in a stitch marker in the middle of my row for literally no reason other than to just give myself a sense of progress. Because like, since it's a cardigan, you know, you're knitting flat and the row is so long, and because there's all of this cabling and the half fisherman's rib going on, each row is just time consuming. So I felt like when I was just trying to knit one row at a time and like having no sense of where I was in the row until I was close to the end, was just starting to feel sort of like aimless, and just it just wasn't as motivating because it just didn't feel like I was going anywhere particularly quickly. So I threw on a stitch marker in the middle of the row, and like as silly as it seems, it like genuinely did make it more enjoyable for me to work on because it just gave me more landmarks along the way, right? I was just able to be like, oh, I'm almost at the halfway mark, rather than not having any sense of where I am until I'm like almost at the very end. It's a small little thing, but that genuinely did make a difference for me. And that difference especially helped because for the length of my body, I actually ended up knitting almost 50% more repeats for the body than the pattern tells you to. I felt like it was just seeming too cropped at the length that the pattern was recommending, despite the fact that I think that when I checked, my gauge was fairly accurate to the pattern, so I think it just is intended to be more on the short side. And I think that in the front, that would have felt like a fine length, but my problem was that, again, this pattern doesn't have short rows, and in retrospect, I wish that it had, or that I had paused to figure out how to add them in at the beginning. I don't think I realized that it wasn't doing anything to even out the lengths of the front and the back, particularly because you start with knitting your back panel. So I think that in my head, it had accounted for that in some way, and the back panel would be like extra long, like longer than the front to kind of accommodate for this. But no, it's not. It does nothing to accommodate for the way that things are going to naturally ride up in the back. So I just found that to get it to feel like the right length in the back, it had to get longer, even when at the front it seemed fine. So I ended up knitting a lot of body, a lot of very long rows. And that one little stitch marker for morale was very helpful. One other thing I did that helped me kind of toward the tail end of this was that I think maybe like 2 weeks out from Christmas, I paused my knitting and I wove in all of the ends that I had in the project up to that point, which I knew was going to be most of them. So just knowing that when I was done my knitting, I wouldn't have an enormous amount of ends to weave in just helped it feel less daunting. Like I could just focus on the knitting and not have to think so much about, okay, I have to factor in like a million hours of little fiddly bits at the end, right? So that just kind of helped, and it just made it more pleasant to keep working on, to not have all of these ends flying everywhere every time I'm flipping it around, because again, you're knitting it flat, so you can't just kind of keep everything like contained inside the little tube of something that you're knitting in the round. So I did enjoy that. I also enjoyed the like 2.5 seasons of Gilmore Girls that I watched. I was binging that show because it normally when I'm knitting, I'll go through my YouTube subscriptions, keep caught up on those. I'll watch, whatever sort of bad reality dating TV shows are currently like, oh, there's a new season of Love is Blind. Great, I'll watch that while I knit. But I was knitting so much on this in the last couple weeks that I had like exhausted all of my usual content sources. Like I had watched everything new out that I had any interest to watch while I was knitting. So I was like, well, I guess we gotta go to Old Reliable. I guess we're just binging Gilmore Girls now until the end of time, and we sure did. And it was, if you're a Gilmore Girls watcher, it was basically like midway through season 5 to the end of season 7. So like not the best part of Gilmore Girls. I've now cycled back around to the beginning, but it was very suitable entertainment for the process and feels appropriate because my sister also loves Gilmore Girls. So it's baked right in the garment. And to catch you up on the rest of the process of this, let's do this as like a proper timeline of the project, because I feel like the dates at which each of these things happened is relevant. So I cast this on October 25th, which solid 2 months exactly until Christmas. And at the time that I cast it on, I felt like that was respectable, less than I wanted to, because again, those stockings just took way longer than I actually thought that they would. But I was like, 2 months, that's plenty of time, that's fine. I don't know why I thought this, because I think that historically all the sweaters that I've made for myself have taken me 2 months or more, and most of them were knit in the round and not with nearly as elaborate of a stitch pattern. Like the cabling on this is so intense. So I don't know why I thought that, but I did. November 17th, I reached the bottom of the V-neck. So I completed the back panel and the front up to the point where you join those 3 pieces together under the arms and you're now able to cast on for sleeves. So that was from October 25th to November 17th took me to get to that point. 3 weeks just to get there. That was the point at which I was like, oh, I don't know if this is happening in time for Christmas. And granted, those were a busy few weeks where I was not knitting as much as I normally would. So I was like, okay, well, maybe if I can just get back on my normal knitting routine, it'll be good. We can still do this. By December 3rd, I was 3/4 done my sleeves because I decided once I had joined the whole body into one piece, I wanted to, as soon as I ran out of that ball of yarn, start on the sleeves just so I would get those done and I would know how much yarn that had taken, and then I could just use whatever was left to knit the body to whatever length that I wanted to without having to worry about, do I have enough for sleeves? How am I doing with my yarn budgeting? So again, that's December 3rd, 22 days out from Christmas. It's only down to here and 3/4 sleeves. That's not looking great. By December 15th, I had full sleeves and the body was longer, but it was still above my natural waist. Okay. It was short. It was a shrug. And I had just started working on the button band as I concluded that, like, okay, at this point it is not going to be done for Christmas, but I would rather that when I do gift her, hilariously, an incomplete thing is still on the needles for Christmas, at least she will be able to envision how it will fit, because it will be complete up to a certain length, right? It will sit on her at the shoulders exactly how it's going to sit on her when it's done. So to do that, I had to reteach myself how to do the Judy's Magic cast on so that I could actually start the neckband from the center of the back neck, rather than the pattern has you do it like from the bottom corner of the garment, but my bottom corner didn't exist yet, so I couldn't do it that way. So I had to refigure that out, and then I started doing one side of that button band. Now, December 21st was a Saturday, and despite the busyness of the holiday season, I think because so many things were slated for the following week, and a lot of people are sort of like, oh God, like, let's not make any more plans because we have so many things coming up for Christmas, I actually had a completely empty weekend. I had nothing I needed to do the Saturday, Sunday, and so I was like, you know what? Let's just power through as much of this as I possibly can this weekend, and maybe, just maybe, by the end of this weekend, maybe I can actually have this done, because I actually managed to get quite a lot done during the week because it was sort of the week leading up to Christmas, and because I don't have any work holiday things or anything like that because I'm self-employed. I had like an empty week and an empty weekend. I'd done so much knitting during the week, and I was like, maybe we can actually do this. So Saturday, I finished the body. I finished my extra repeats of the cabling, and I managed to do all of the ribbing, even managed to do the Italian bind off all the way across, and continued working on the button band. So I was like, oh my God, we're so close. I have no plans tomorrow. I think tomorrow I can finish this button band, and then that's it, we're done. So then December 22nd, the Sunday, I was like, okay, it's like 2 p.m. I'm 3/4 of the way through the button band now. Like, look at me go. We're so close. I can totally do this. The end is so in sight. I did it. Like, I'm going to do it. It's done. And then I noticed a problem, which was that my button band was doing some rippling. And it hadn't really been obvious while I was working it up, because as you're sort of working section by section, like, you know, there's sort of a bit of tension on the button band in the area that you're holding, and the rest is just sort of like flopping behind you. I noticed a little bit of rippling, but I kind of attributed it to just like, well, like, it'll block out, like, it's very minor. I think it's just, you know, the nature of like, this hasn't been blocked yet. I did some mid-project blocks. Like, I think it'll even out, because as I was working it up, it seemed very minor. Like, I'm looking at it in small sections just as I'm working on it. But the more of it I worked up, the more concerning it started to look. And I put it on when I was 3/4 of the way done, and I was like, oh, this has actually made the front significantly longer than the back because of all the extra length from this extra button band that's like rippling out. And I do not like how it looks. And I cannot have put this much effort into this and have it come out in a way that I'm not happy with. So at 3 p.m. on December 22nd, I unraveled 3/4 of a full cardigan's double knit button band. So that was great for morale. Yeah, I didn't love that. Actually, though, before I unraveled it, I did start attempting to fix it from another spot. So it actually worked out because, like I said before, my sort of makeshift solution for this was starting the button band from the back of the neck and going down both sides rather than picking up from the bottom edge, right? And it so happened that I had finished going down one side of it and was still working on the other, but the end that I hadn't gotten to yet was actually the corner that the pattern would have you start from. So instead, I started to do the button band as the pattern recommends, starting from that bottom corner, and wanted to make sure that what I was doing differently was actually going to be better before I frogged the entire rest of it, which to do that meant that I had to do a tubular cast on, which I think I have done once or twice before, but not in a very long time. And I think, like, in part because of the time crunch and trying to get this done and being frustrated by the button band not having worked out and having spent so much time on it, I like almost had a meltdown trying to follow a tutorial to do this. I was having such a hard time understanding, like, what am I supposed to, like, where's this needle going? What? I have very poor spatial reasoning, like, trying to watch a video of someone being like, it just, my brain was not having it. It was a real struggle. It took a lot of tries to get those, like, 12 or whatever stitches cast on for this button band. It was a nightmare, but we did it, we got there. And I started picking up the button band with a reduced pickup rate, and it was turning out so much better. So by the time it sort of caught up to where I had left off with the previous version of the button band, I went and I frogged all of my many hours of that button band, because I realized now I actually forgot to mention I had already done part of this button band twice, because Since I was starting at the back of the neck and coming down the two separate sides, the method for doing the pick up as you go button band was actually slightly different from one side to the other to try to get it to look the same, but I was finding that the second side, I wasn't loving how it looked anyway, the way that I was doing it. And again, the pattern doesn't tell you how to do it in a way that they look the same because you're not supposed to do it this way. You're not supposed to do it going in opposite directions. You're just supposed to start in the bottom corner and go all the way around. So I was sort of off-roading, trying to figure it out myself and not entirely succeeding in that on my first try. So I'd already ripped out a chunk of that second half of the button band and started doing it with a different method to get it to match the other side better. And then I had to undo the whole thing and redo the whole thing again. So I did a lot of double knit button band. I basically did a quadruple knit button band if you think about it, which I don't want to think about it. But so by the end of Sunday, December 22nd, I had done, I think like 60% of that double knit button band. I had managed to do that much. So at that point, when I was so close to done by the end of the 22nd, I was like, you know what? I'm supposed to be working tomorrow, the 23rd, the Monday, but like nothing's really due. So I think I'm just gonna play hooky and make up for that time later because I cannot get this close to done this and not finish it in time. Like that's just sad. So I will be finishing it. And I did on December 23rd finish the button band, weave in the remaining ends, and then sew in a tag at the end, which again, I find it really hard to sew things into knitting. I pinned it so carefully in hopes of it turning out straight and the tag still somehow ended up crooked. So I don't know how to do this well. If you have a secret, let me know. But you know what? That's just part of the handmade charm. It's gonna have to be. So once I was done that, I threw it in the washing machine and then I dried it on high because again, it was really important to me that I knew that I could do that. And to be clear, if you haven't seen the updates leading up to this point, I'd done some mid-project blocks much earlier on so that this was tested and I knew it could go in the dryer on high and that like wild things weren't gonna happen. But I did that. So here's what it looked like before blocking. And here's what it looked like after. So you can see that the blocking really relaxed the cabling in a really nice way. Like it didn't feel like the garment got bigger, it just felt like it draped more comfortably and more naturally. I did get a little bit of like cinching at the front corners from the button band post blocking. Like you can see before blocking, the button band looks kind of like the exact right pickup rate, and then post blocking, it's pulling it up in the corners just a little bit, but like this is so much better than what it looked like before I redid the button band. So like given that saga, given everything, I am so happy with how it turned out in the end. Now, I don't have this with me today to show you because I did give it away to my sister on Christmas morning, but I did manage to find just a few minutes to quickly throw it on and film after I had finished it so that you can see it sort of in its entire glory, because I felt like just giving you a couple of pictures of it in the aftermath wasn't gonna quite do it justice after its whole saga on this channel. So let's go visit Past Me. Allie from the past here because ta-da! I did it. The Minu cardigan is actually finished, which is like a Christmas miracle. I think if you cannot tell by the fact that I'm wearing my most obnoxious Christmas earrings, it is currently Christmas Eve that I'm checking in to show this finished because tomorrow morning I will be gifting this to my sister and therefore I won't have it by the time that I'm recording my Everything Ever Knit this year. But I feel like after the saga of trying to squish this in before Christmas, I felt like it really deserved to be live on the channel and not just like a couple photos popped up in the side. So I am cramming this in like 10 minutes before I run out the door to celebrate Christmas Eve. But look at it. Isn't it wonderful? Look at the button band. It was a battle. I earned every inch of this beautiful button band a couple times over. So I don't have time to get into all the details right now. Future me will take care of that, but I just wanted to show you really quickly. So let me get up. Ta-da! So post blocking, this relaxed so much. You know, the cables were very sort of tight and like structured and rigid, and it didn't really change the overall dimensions of the garment very much. It actually, if anything, did shrink up a little because I did use heat in the dryer because I wanted to make sure that it could hold up to that, but it just feels so much kind of looser and drapier and just like cozier post blocking, which is really nice. Copper also wants to be involved in modeling the cardigan. Hello. So yeah, this is the back, and actually my button band helped to kind of cinch up the front because this pattern has no short rows. So before, the back was kind of noticeably riding up compared to the front, but adding in the button band and the rate that I did that at sort of pulled up the front just enough that it's pretty close to even all the way around. It does like come up here a little bit. So like given the saga of this button band, this is like an achievement. So yeah, this is Kim's Minu cardigan. Hopefully she likes it. Hopefully I get a good picture of her in it that I can show you maybe. But yeah, I am just so happy that I actually got this done, and especially because I have been doing like nothing else for the last couple weeks. It has been like eat, sleep, work, knit, like that. That's like all that I've been doing. So by the time I started to get really close, I was like, oh God, this is gonna be so annoying if I get this close and don't manage to finish it. So I'm very glad to have it off the needles, and that means I can actually start working on something new that I want to work on for myself, and to not just be like, okay, Christmas is over, now back to knitting that Christmas gift knit I'm still on, you know, so it'll just feel really nice to get to start something new probably on Boxing Day. So anyway, I will let future me take it away from here, but I just wanted to check in. Bye. Now, I don't entirely understand what the deal is with this button band, because in the pattern it's just a 1-to-1 stitch pickup rate. So I don't see why it should have ended up seeming so grossly large when it's 1-to-1. That should be simple, right? And so I'm wondering if maybe it's something to do with, because the rippling seems to fall in line with where the cabling happens. So is it that when stitches are shifting side to side in a cable, maybe their height ends up being shorter because they're going more sideways? So maybe the pickup rate actually should have been reduced at the spots where the cabling has happened. Or maybe I was just misreading my selvage and doing like 2-for-1 instead of 1-to-1, because I don't ever feel entirely confident picking up stitches. Like, I entirely understand the anatomy of what I'm looking at on selvage edge, so maybe, I don't know. I'm just glad that I ended up with something that looked good in the end. But so that's it. That's everything that I've knit this year. And in the spirit of what I'm knitting, how it's going, and what it's costing me, I added everything up, and my grand total for my knits this year is $818 Canadian, or $567 US, which honestly I was expecting worse. So I feel okay about that. I think that my last year, like when I did my Everything I Ever Knit video, I added everything up. I think it was over $2,000. Maybe it was $1,800, but that was for 2 years worth of knitting. That's basically $1,000 a year. So hey, we're coming in under that at least. I think part of that is that I've started to knit often at a finer gauge than I was before. Like in my first year of knitting, I did a lot of like bulky or Aran or worsted weight projects, which again, just more yarn, more volume, more money, just flying through projects more quickly also. So hey, our costs are coming down over time. Good for me. So yeah, that's everything I knit this year. If you'd like to continue strolling down memory lane with me and you haven't seen my Everything I Ever Knit video, I will pop that up here for some continued viewing. Or if you'd like to see what I'm planning on knitting next, I will point you to my winter knitting plans video that went up recently with my thoughts on what my next cast-ons are going to be. I would also love to know how your knitting went this year. Let me know in the comments what was your favorite thing you knit this year. And that's all I've got for you today. So thank you so much for coming to knit with me. If you'd like to be here next time, I hope you'll consider subscribing if you're not already. If you already are, you're my favorite, and I'll see you next time.